The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken promises. Emma Cross sat perfectly still in the second row, her hands folded on her lap, her face a mask of exhaustion that 14 years of marriage had taught her to wear well. Across the aisle, Lucas Hale leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the armrest, his smile barely concealed. His lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Gerald Whitmore, shuffled papers with the satisfied efficiency of someone who knew exactly how this would end. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears, but she kept her eyes down, her shoulders slightly hunched, playing the part she'd rehearsed for months. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "By signing this agreement, you accept full ownership of all marital assets as listed in sections 3 through 17. He paused, letting the words settle. "And with that ownership comes full responsibility for all associated debts, liens, and financial obligations tied to said properties." Lucas nodded once, confident, almost bored. "Yes, Your Honor. You understand this is legally binding and irrevocable once signed?" "I understand completely." Lucas picked up the pen, his smirk widening as he scrawled his signature across the bottom of the page. Gerald hesitated, his hand hovering near Lucas's elbow as if to stop him, but Lucas waved him off with an irritated flick of his wrist. Emma lowered her eyes further, her breathing shallow. To anyone watching, she looked defeated, destroyed. A woman who'd just lost everything she'd spent 14 years building. The judge stamped the document. "This agreement is now legally binding. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the room. Lucas stood, buttoning his jacket with one hand, already turning toward the exit. His lawyer followed, quiet now, his earlier confidence replaced with something Emma recognized as unease. She remained seated, unmoving, until the courtroom emptied. Only then did she lift her head, just slightly, and allow herself the smallest exhale. What Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this moment, this exact second, was the moment his entire life collapsed. And the beautiful thing about it? He wouldn't realize it for another 72 hours. Let me take you back. Back to the day he asked for the divorce. Back to the moment Emma Cross stopped being the woman everyone thought she was and became something else entirely. But before we get into that, if you're watching this and you love stories about quiet revenge, about people who thought they could take everything and learned they were wrong, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is all about stories that make you feel something real. Stories about people who survive what was meant to destroy them. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get back to Emma. 14 years earlier, Riverview Heights was everything Lucas Hale needed it to be. A suburb just outside the city limits, close enough for commuters, far enough to feel like an escape. Young families were moving in. Property values were climbing. And Lucas, with his easy smile and confident handshake, positioned himself right at the center of it all. This isn't just development, he'd told investors at the community center that first year. This is legacy. We're building the future here. People believed him. Why wouldn't they? He had the vision, the charisma, the drive. What they didn't see, what nobody saw, was Emma. Emma, who ran his books from their kitchen table while their daughter Maya napped upstairs. Emma, who made the calls to contractors when invoices went unpaid. Emma, who memorized the names of every investor's spouse and sent birthday cards on Lucas's behalf. "You're amazing at this," Lucas had told her once, years ago, back when he still said things like that. "I couldn't do any of this without you." She'd believed him. For a long time, she'd believed him. Their home was a 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Drive, the kind of house that appeared in local magazine spreads about successful young families. White trim, black shutters, a garden. Emma maintained herself because Lucas said landscapers were an unnecessary expense. Inside, everything was carefully curated. Neutral tones, minimal clutter, the kind of aesthetic that photographed well. Emma had quit her job as a legal assistant 3 months after Maya was born. It had made sense at the time. Lucas's business was growing. Someone needed to be home. Someone needed to manage the details he was too busy to handle. Just for a few years, he'd promised. Once we're really established, you can go back to work if you want. The years passed. The business grew. Emma stayed home. She didn't mind, not really. Not at first. There was satisfaction in keeping everything running smoothly, in being the foundation Lucas built his success on. People praised him at neighborhood gatherings, at fundraisers, at Maya's school events. Lucas Hale is really something, they'd say. Really going places. Emma would smile and nod and refill their drinks. Then came the night everything changed.
It was a Tuesday.
Lucas had flown to Denver for a development conference, some 3-day event where developers networked and pretended to care about sustainable housing. Maya was at a sleepover. Emma had the house to herself, a rare, quiet evening she'd planned to spend catching up on the stack of paperwork Lucas always left scattered across his home office. She was looking for a file on the Riverside Plaza project, something Lucas needed emailed to a potential investor first thing Wednesday morning. She clicked through his desktop folders, systematic and efficient, the way she'd learned to be. That's when she saw it. A folder labeled Personal Archive. She almost didn't open it. Almost. But something about the way it was nested 3 folders deep, hidden behind tax returns from 2019 and old client contracts, made her pause. Made her curious. Inside were emails.
Dozens of them.
Subject lines that made her stomach drop. Final notice. Payment required. Default warning. Action required within 30 days. Outstanding balance. Immediate response needed. Her hands were shaking as she clicked the first one open. A loan on the Riverside Plaza property. Overdue by 4 months. Interest compounding daily. A balance that made her vision blur. She opened another. Then another. The family home, their home, the house she'd gardened and painted and poured herself into, had 4 separate loans against it.
4.
The primary mortgage she knew about. But there were 3 others. Home equity lines of credit, each one larger than the last, each one signed in Lucas's name alone. She clicked through spreadsheets, bank statements, loan documents Lucas had scanned and saved with casual carelessness. Properties listed at values that couldn't possibly be accurate. Cash flow statements showing red numbers, losses papered over with new loans. Assets inflated. Liabilities hidden. The total came to $1.6 million.
Possibly more.
She sat back in the desk chair, her pulse roaring in her ears. The house was silent around her. Too silent. She could hear her own breathing, fast and shallow. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't the normal risk that came with development. This was deception. Systematic, deliberate deception. And she'd helped him build it. She heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. Lucas wasn't supposed to be back until Thursday. Emma? His voice echoed down the stairs. You still up? She closed the laptop with shaking hands and stood, smoothing her shirt, forcing her face into something neutral.
Yeah.
Just finishing some paperwork. He appeared in the doorway, still in his travel clothes, his tie loosened. Conference was a waste of time. Caught an early flight back. He glanced at the desk, at the closed laptop, his eyes narrowing slightly. What paperwork? Just the Riverside files you needed. Her voice was steady. That surprised her. I'll email them in the morning. He studied her for a beat too long, then nodded.
Great.
I'm exhausted. Coming to bed. In a few minutes. She waited until she heard him in the bathroom, the sound of running water, before she opened the laptop again. She didn't have much time. She navigated back to the folder, to the emails, and started taking screenshots. One after another after another. Her hands moved on autopilot while her mind raced. She uploaded them to a cloud drive Lucas didn't know about. A personal email account she'd created years ago and never told him existed. Then she cleared the browser history, shut down the computer, and walked upstairs like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That night, lying beside Lucas in their king-sized bed, listening to him snore, Emma made a decision. She wouldn't confront him.
Not yet.
Maybe not ever. because confrontation would give him time to spin it, to explain it away, to make her doubt what she'd seen. Instead, she would watch, document,
Prepare.
for what, she didn't know yet. But she would be ready. The next morning, Lucas left for a site visit before Maya woke up. Emma made breakfast, drove her daughter to school, smiled at the other mothers in the drop-off line, then drove to Office Depot and bought 3 external hard drives. At home, she went through Lucas's office methodically, photographing every document, every spreadsheet, every scrap of paper with a number on it. She backed everything up twice, labeled the drives with innocuous names like Maya School Photos 2019 to 2021 and Kitchen Renovation Ideas, and hid them in the bottom of her sewing box in the guest room closet. Lucas never went near her sewing supplies. For weeks, she maintained perfect normalcy. She ran his errands, managed his schedule, hosted a dinner party for his investors where she served salmon and roasted vegetables and laughed at their jokes. She was the perfect wife, the invisible engine. But at night, after Lucas fell asleep, she would pull out her phone and add to her growing collection. Bank statements, emails, contracts. She began to see the patterns. The way Lucas would take out a loan on one property to cover payments on another. The way he'd list properties as assets at inflated values to secure new credit. It was a house of cards, brilliant in its complexity, doomed in its foundation. And she'd been part of it. She'd made the calls, sent the emails, balanced the books. Her fingerprints were on everything. That thought kept her up at night. If this collapsed, if the truth came out, would she go down with him? Then Karen started acting strange. Karen Mitchum had been Emma's closest friend for 7 years. They'd met at Maya's preschool, bonded over terrible coffee and exhausting parenting stories. Karen knew things about Emma that Lucas didn't. Small things. Important things. The name of her favorite bookstore. How she felt about her mother-in-law. The fact that she'd once dreamed of getting her interior design certification. But lately, Karen was different.
Distant.
When Emma called, Karen's responses were short, distracted. She canceled lunch plans twice. When they did meet for coffee, Karen asked odd questions. How's Lucas's business doing? I heard the Riverside project hit some delays. Is Lucas thinking about selling any properties? I have a cousin looking to invest. You guys seem really comfortable. Must be nice to not worry about money. Emma smiled and deflected and changed the subject. But she noticed. She noticed everything now. Then came the Sunday afternoon that shattered what was left of her old life. They were in the kitchen, Emma chopping vegetables for dinner while Lucas sat at the island with his laptop, typing emails. Maya was upstairs on a video call with friends. Outside, the spring sun made everything look deceptively peaceful. I want a divorce. The words were so casual, so matter-of-fact, that Emma thought she'd misheard. She set down the knife carefully, wiped her hands on a towel, and turned to face him. What? Lucas didn't look up from his screen. I want a divorce. I've been thinking about it for a while. It's time. The kitchen tilted. Emma gripped the counter edge. You've been thinking about it? For how long? Does it matter? He finally met her eyes, his expression blank. Not angry. Not sad. Just done. We're not happy. You know we're not happy. I didn't know that. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I thought we were fine. He laughed, a short, humorless sound. Fine isn't enough, Emma. We've been roommates for years. I need more than that. More than what? More than 14 years? More than Maya? More than everything we've built. Everything I've built. He closed the laptop with a quiet snap. Let's be honest here. I've been running this business, building this life. You've been a what? Making dinner? Doing errands? That's not partnership. That's not marriage. The words hit like physical blows. Emma's face went hot, then cold. I run your books. I manage your schedule. I handle your contractors. I've spent 14 years making sure you could focus on building your business. And I appreciate that. His tone suggested he didn't. But it's not the same as actually building something. You've been coasting on what I create. The injustice of it, the sheer wrongness, made Emma's vision blur. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't give him that. When did you decide this? Does it matter? It matters to me. He sighed, irritated now. A few months ago. Maybe longer.
I don't know, Emma.
I just know I'm done. A few months ago. Around the time he'd started keeping his phone face down on the table. Around the time he'd started going to the gym at odd hours. Around the time Karen had started asking strange questions. Is there someone else? The words came out flat, emotionless. She already knew the answer. Lucas stood, picking up his laptop. I'm going to stay at the office tonight. We can talk about logistics later. I want a house. I built this place, I should keep it. You can have one of the cars. We'll figure out custody. He walked out of the kitchen. Up the stairs. Maya's door opened, muffled conversation, then closed again. The front door shut with a decisive click. Emma stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by half-chopped vegetables and the life she thought she'd been living, and felt something inside her shift. Not break.
Shift.
Because now she knew. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. And that meant Lucas had been preparing for this while she'd been playing the perfect wife. But she'd been preparing too.
He just didn't know it yet.
The next week was a blur of humiliation painted in suburban normalcy. Lucas moved into his downtown office apartment, the one he'd leased 6 months ago for late nights and early meetings. Emma stayed in the house with Maya, who asked questions Emma couldn't answer. Is Dad coming back? I don't know, sweetheart. Did you guys have a fight? Something like that. Is it my fault? God, no. Maya, no. This is between Dad and me. You didn't do anything wrong. But Emma could see her daughter pulling away, retreating into her phone in her room, processing something no 14-year-old should have to process. Lucas filed the divorce papers the following Monday. His demands were itemized with brutal efficiency. The house. The cars, both of them. Full ownership of Hale Development Group. Primary custody of Maya. Child support obligations for Emma based on an income she no longer had. The demands came with a narrative, too. Lucas told anyone who would listen that Emma had never really contributed to the business. That she'd been content to stay home while he built something real. That she deserved a fair settlement, sure, but nothing close to half. I mean, she didn't work, he told their accountant, who repeated it to his wife, who mentioned it at book club. She hasn't had a job in 14 years. What exactly is she claiming to deserve? The story spread through Riverview Heights, like wildfire through dry grass. Emma felt the shift at school pickup, at the grocery store, at the coffee shop she'd been going to for a decade. The sympathetic looks that masked judgment. The questions that weren't really questions. Are you going to be okay financially? Will you go back to work? I'm sure Lucas will be fair. He's always been so generous. Then came the day Lucas's lawyer delivered the eviction notice. Eviction. Emma stared at the document in disbelief. This is my home. It's Mr. Hale's property, the lawyer explained with practiced patience. He's offered you 30 days to secure alternative housing. He feels it's inappropriate for you to remain in his home during the divorce proceedings. His home? I've lived here for 12 years. My daughter lives here. Mr. Hale is willing to accommodate Maya's schedule with generous visitation. Get out. Emma's voice was ice. Get out of my house. The lawyer left. Emma looked around at the walls she'd painted, the floors she'd refinished, the life she'd poured into every corner, and felt the last thread of mercy toward Lucas snap clean through. She called a realtor the next day. Found a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex across town, smaller and darker and nothing like the home she was leaving. She packed systematically, methodically, taking only what was hers.
Clothes. Books.
Maya's things. The sewing box with its hidden drives. The day she moved out, Lucas's new girlfriend posted a photo on social media. The photo was taken in Emma's kitchen, the kitchen Emma had designed and renovated. The girlfriend wore an apron Emma had left behind, smiling beside Lucas like they were starring in their own domestic fantasy. The caption read, "Finally feels like home." Emma blocked her. Then she blocked Lucas's mother, who had called twice to tell her she was handling this badly and needed to think about Lucas's reputation. Then she blocked Karen, who had sent a long message explaining that she had to be loyal to both of them but understood Lucas's position. Maya cried the first night in the apartment, curled up on her new bed, which wasn't her bed, in a room that wasn't her room, sobbing into pillows that smelled wrong. Emma sat beside her, stroking her hair, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. Nothing that would make this better. Nothing that would give her daughter back the life she'd lost. That night, after Maya finally fell asleep, Emma sat on the floor of her own room and allowed herself 10 minutes. 10 minutes to cry, to rage, to feel the full weight of what Lucas had done.
To her.
To Maya. To the 14 years she'd given him. Then she dried her face, opened her laptop, and sent an email to an attorney whose name she'd found through a discreet Google search weeks ago. Subject line: consultation request, urgent. April Monroe responded within an hour. They met at a coffee shop 2 days later, a place far enough from Riverview Heights that Emma didn't risk running into anyone she knew. April was younger than Emma expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. She ordered black coffee and got straight to it. Tell me everything. Emma did. She started with the loans, the hidden debts, the house of cards Lucas had built. Then the divorce, the humiliation, the eviction. She showed April the drives, the screenshots, the documentation she'd been gathering for months. April went through it all in silence, her expression unchanging. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright. You've been preparing for this. I didn't know I was, Emma admitted. Not at first. I just knew I needed to understand what was happening. Do you want revenge? April asked. Or, do you want freedom? Emma thought about Lucas's smirk in the coffee shop, his girlfriend in her kitchen, Karen's betrayal, his mother's judgment, the 14 years she'd given to a man who'd reduced her to nothing. I want both, she said quietly. Is that possible? April smiled for the first time. Let me ask you something. When you quit your job, did you ever close your accounts? Your retirement fund? Your savings?
No.
I left them alone. Lucas always handled our joint accounts. And when your Aunt Claire passed, she left you money, correct? Emma nodded. $50,000. I put it in my old savings account. Never touched it. What about the house? Whose name is on the deed? Both of ours. But the loans? Just Lucas's name. All of them. April leaned back in her chair, that smile widening.
Emma.
You've just told me that you have separate protected assets. Assets that Lucas doesn't know about or has forgotten exist. And he's signing divorce papers that give him full ownership of heavily leveraged properties while you walk away with what appears to be nothing. I don't understand. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put your assets into an educational trust for Maya. Completely protected. Then we're going to give Lucas exactly what he wants. The house. The business. All of it. We're going to make this divorce as easy and fast as possible. But he wins. Does he? April pulled out a calculator. How much does he owe on the properties he's claiming? Emma did the math in her head. $1.6 million give or take. And how much is he claiming they're worth? $2 million. Maybe. In this market? Try $1.4 million. Maybe less. When you give him full ownership, you're also giving him full responsibility for all associated debts. Every loan, every liability, every creditor who comes calling. Understanding dawned like cold sunlight. He doesn't realize he's signing himself into bankruptcy. April's smile was sharp as glass. All we have to do is make sure he thinks he's winning. Make sure he signs without looking too closely.
Can you do that?
Emma thought about the apartment, about Maya crying herself to sleep, about Lucas's girlfriend in her kitchen. Yes, she said. I can do that. If you're still watching, I need you to do something for me right now. Pause this video, hit that like button if you haven't already, and drop a comment. Tell me what you think Emma should do next. Tell me if you've ever been underestimated like this. And if you're loving this story, share it. Because this is the kind of story people need to hear. The kind that reminds you that the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous. Alright, let's keep going. The next 8 weeks were a performance that would have won Emma an Oscar if life gave awards for survival. She played the part Lucas expected her to play. The exhausted ex-wife. The woman who'd been out of the workforce too long to fight back. The mother too focused on her daughter to understand the financial complexity of what was happening. She met with Lucas's lawyer and asked for almost nothing. One of the cars, the older sedan, Lucas never drove anyway. A small cash settlement to get her through the next few months. Enough child support to cover Maya's basics. Lucas's lawyer, Gerald, had looked at her like she was simple. Mrs. Hale, you're entitled to far more than this. I just want this over, Emma had said, her voice trembling just slightly. I can't keep fighting. It's hurting Maya. Gerald had reported back to Lucas. Emma knew because Karen, in a moment of guilty conscience, sent her a text. Lucas says you're being reasonable. He's relieved. Of course he was relieved. He'd expected a battle and gotten a surrender. Meanwhile, April worked behind the scenes with surgical precision. She transferred Emma's retirement fund, the one from her old job that had been growing untouched for 14 years, into an educational trust for Maya. She did the same with Aunt Claire's inheritance and the small savings account Emma had maintained separately. Everything was moved into vehicles Lucas couldn't touch, protected by language April drafted personally. If he asks about assets, you tell him the truth, April instructed. You have a small retirement fund and some inheritance from your aunt. Both are going toward Maya's future. He can't argue with that, and he won't look deeper because men like Lucas don't think women are smart enough to hide money. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a sweater that had seen better days and minimal makeup. She looked tired. She was tired. But it was strategic exhaustion now, weaponized. Lucas arrived with Gerald, dressed in a sharp suit, looking like a man who'd already won. They went through the motions. The mediator outlined the terms Lucas had proposed. Full ownership of the marital home and all properties owned by Hale Development Group. Full responsibility for all business debts. Emma would receive the sedan, a cash settlement of $15,000 and child support based on Lucas's current income. Mrs. Hale, the mediator said gently, you should know that you're entitled to request a forensic accounting of your husband's business. Given the complexity. I don't want that, Emma interrupted. I just want this finished. Lucas and Gerald exchanged a look. Gerald's expression was uncertain. He leaned toward Lucas, whispering something Emma couldn't hear. Lucas waved him off impatiently. My client accepts these terms, Lucas said. Can we just sign? The mediator hesitated. Mr. Hale, I'd advise you to take time to review. I've reviewed. Let's sign. Documents were produced. Lucas signed first, his signature bold and confident. Emma signed second, her hand steady, her face carefully neutral.
Done.
The mediator scheduled a court date for final approval, more formality than substance. Lucas stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without looking back. Gerald lingered, his expression troubled, but he followed his client. April touched Emma's arm briefly. Well done. How long? Emma asked quietly. Until he realizes?
Weeks.
Maybe less. The court date arrived on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain. Emma wore the same sweater, the same exhausted expression. Lucas wore confidence like armor. The judge reviewed the agreement with routine efficiency. He looked at Lucas over his reading glasses. Mr. Hale, you understand that by accepting full ownership of all marital properties, you also accept full responsibility for all debts, liens, mortgages, and financial obligations associated with those properties. Yes, Your Honor. Lucas's voice was smooth.
Board.
And you've waived your right to forensic accounting? Yes. You understand this is irrevocable? I understand. Lucas picked up the pen and signed. The judge stamped the document. The gavel came down. This agreement is now legally binding. Congratulations on your divorce. Lucas left the courtroom smiling. Emma left the courtroom breathing. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Lucas was talking to Gerald near his BMW. Emma walked past them, heading toward her sedan, when Lucas called out, Emma. She turned. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. I hope you land on your feet. I really do. You were a good wife. It wasn't working anymore. Emma felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. I know. Maya will be fine. Kids are resilient. She will be. Because Emma would make sure of it. Because Emma had protected her daughter in ways Lucas would never understand. Lucas nodded, satisfied with himself, and drove away. Gerald lingered, his face troubled. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again, and walked to his own car. April appeared beside Emma, her heels clicking on concrete. 72 hours. Maybe less. What happens then? Reality happens. Emma drove back to her apartment. She picked up Maya from school. They ordered pizza and watched a movie, and for the first time in months, Emma felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. The first domino fell on Friday morning. Lucas got a call from the bank holding the primary mortgage on the Riverside Plaza property. The property hadn't generated enough revenue to cover costs for 3 consecutive quarters. The loan was being called. Full payment required within 60 days, or they'd foreclose. Lucas could have covered it. If he'd had access to the equity in other properties. If he'd been able to sell quickly. If the market had been better. But the market had softened over the winter. Properties Lucas had valued at inflated numbers couldn't sell for those prices. And every other property he owned had loans against it. He called Gerald. They can't call the loan. I've been making payments. Minimum payments, Lucas. The contract has a performance clause. If the property underperforms, they have the right to call the full balance. So I'll sell another property to cover it. Which property? The house has 4 loans against it. The commercial building downtown is underwater. The land in Pine Valley has liens from unpaid contractor fees. There has to be something. Silence. Gerald. Lucas. How much do you actually owe across all properties? That's when Lucas realized he'd never added it up. Not comprehensively. Not with all the loans and lines of credit and bridge financing he'd layered on over the years. He spent the weekend with spreadsheets, with statements, with numbers that wouldn't stop climbing. Every asset he owned was leveraged. Every property he'd claimed was actually a liability dragging him down. And he owned all of it. Every single piece. The divorce decree had been crystal clear. Full ownership. Full responsibility. He called his accountant Monday morning. The accountant spent 2 hours on the phone asking questions Lucas didn't want to answer. Then the accountant said 6 words that stopped Lucas's heart. You need to file for bankruptcy. What? Lucas, you're technically insolvent. Your debts exceed your assets by at least $400,000. Probably more. That's not possible. It's very possible. You've been moving money around to cover payments, but it was never sustainable. And now that everything's in your name only. Lucas hung up and called Emma. She didn't answer. He called again. And again. Finally, she picked up. Lucas. We need to talk. About what? About the settlement. There's been a mistake. I didn't realize we need to renegotiate. Emma's voice was calm, almost gentle. The settlement is final, Lucas. The judge signed it. It's binding. Emma, I'm serious. This is important. So was our marriage. But you made your choice. I'm going to lose everything. I know. The line went silent. When Lucas spoke again, his voice shook. You knew. You knew about the loans. I knew about everything. You set me up. No, Emma said softly. I let you do it to yourself. I just stopped holding it together. She hung up. Lucas stood in his office apartment, the one he'd leased to impress his girlfriend, and felt the walls close in. The second domino fell that same afternoon. His girlfriend, Ashley, the one who'd posed in Emma's kitchen, found out about the bankruptcy. She'd heard from her own father, who was in real estate, who'd heard from someone at the bank. She came to the office apartment and collected her things without saying a word. Walked out and blocked his number. The third domino fell on Tuesday. Lucas's mother called. I heard what happened. Mom, I need you to know that the loan I gave you last year, I need it back. The full $40,000. My accountant says if you're filing bankruptcy, I need to collect before it's official. You're calling it a loan? Your own son. Don't make this about sentiment, Lucas. You've been reckless. I warned you about overextending. You didn't listen. She hung up before he could respond. Karen texted that night. A long, rambling message about how she was sorry, but she couldn't be involved anymore, how she had to think about her own family, how she hoped he understood. He didn't respond. The creditors started calling. Every day brought new letters, new demands, new threats of legal action. The business accounts were frozen. The properties went into foreclosure proceedings one by one. Gerald stopped returning calls, probably because Lucas couldn't afford to pay him anymore. By the end of the month, Lucas had moved into a studio apartment in a part of town he'd once driven through without looking. His BMW was repossessed. His phone rang constantly with numbers he didn't recognize. He tried to see Maya, but the visits were strained. She was polite but distant, like she'd learned to protect herself from disappointment. She talked about her new apartment with Emma, about how her room was smaller but felt safer. She didn't ask when he'd get his life back together. Maybe she'd stopped believing he would. On a Thursday evening in April, 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Lucas showed up at Emma's apartment. He knocked on the door, his hands shaking, his face hollow with exhaustion. Emma looked at him through the peephole. She recognized the man she'd married, but barely. The confidence was gone. The arrogance had been replaced with something that looked like desperation. She didn't open the door. Maya appeared beside her, silent. She looked at her mother, a question in her eyes. Emma shook her head. Lucas knocked again. Emma, please. I know you're there. I need to talk to you. What did he need? Forgiveness? Help? A chance to spin one more story? Build one more con? Emma leaned against the door and closed her eyes. Mom, Maya whispered. We're not opening it, Emma said quietly. He made his choices. Now he lives with them. They stood there together, mother and daughter, listening as Lucas knocked 3 more times. Then stopped. Then walked away. Emma didn't watch him go. She was done watching Lucas hail. The following week, Emma enrolled in an interior design certification program at the community college. It was something she'd wanted to do for years, something she'd talked about back when she and Lucas were young and still dreamed together. The classes were in the evenings twice a week. Maya would do homework at the kitchen table while Emma studied, their quiet companionship filling the small apartment with something that felt like peace. The apartment itself became a project. Emma painted the kitchen a warm clay beige, the color she'd always wanted but Lucas had vetoed because it wasn't trendy enough. She hung curtains she'd sewn herself. She filled the space with plants and books and soft lighting that made everything feel gentle. It's starting to feel like home, Maya said one evening, looking up from her math homework. Emma paused, a paintbrush in her hand, and felt something unlock in her chest.
Yeah.
It is. Her design instructor, a woman named Patricia, who'd run her own firm for 20 years, pulled Emma aside after the 3rd class. You have an eye for this. Have you ever considered doing it professionally? I used to think about it, Emma admitted. But life got in the way. Life always gets in the way, Patricia said. The question is whether you're going to let it keep you stopped. Emma started taking freelance projects. Small ones at first. A friend of a friend needed help staging a house for sale. A neighbor wanted her living room redesigned. Word spread quietly through networks of women who understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing. Women who knew that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was survive and then create something beautiful from the wreckage. The money wasn't much, not compared to what Lucas used to bring in. But it was hers. Earned by her hands, her vision, her work. And it was enough. April called one morning in May. Thought you'd want to know. Lucas filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy yesterday. It's going to wipe out most of his creditors, but his credit is destroyed for the next decade. How much did he lose? Everything. The house was sold at auction last week. Barely covered the outstanding mortgages. The business assets were liquidated. His mother collected on that loan you mentioned because she filed early enough. He walked away with nothing but debt and a ruined reputation. Emma thought she'd feel satisfaction hearing that. Vindication. Instead, she felt tired. Good, she said, because it was expected. But what she really felt was relief that it was over. "Emma," April said carefully. "What you did, protecting your assets, documenting everything, that was smart. But you know the real reason you won this?
Why?
Because you understood something Lucas never did. You understood that the person holding everything together has all the power. The second you stopped holding his life together, it fell apart. He never learned to do it himself." After they hung up, Emma stood in her small kitchen and looked around at the life she'd built. Not the life she'd planned. Not the life she'd thought she wanted when she was young and in love with a man who promised her everything. But a life that was hers. Solid.
Real.
Safe. Maya came home from school that afternoon full of stories about a project she was working on, about a boy who'd asked her to the spring dance, about whether she could get her ears double-pierced. Normal teenage concerns. The kind of concerns that meant she was healing. They made dinner together, pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy, but made with care. They ate at the small table by the window, talking about nothing and everything. Maya laughed at something Emma said, a real laugh, and Emma felt the last knot of tension release from her spine. Later, after Maya went to bed, Emma sat on her small balcony with a glass of wine and watched the city lights blink on one by one. She thought about Lucas in his studio apartment, maybe also watching the city, maybe wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. She thought about Karen, who'd sent another apology text Emma hadn't answered. About Lucas's mother, who'd collected her money and vanished. About Ashley, the girlfriend, who'd probably moved on to someone else with better prospects. She thought about the woman she'd been 14 years ago, young and eager, and so sure that loving someone meant making yourself smaller, so they could be bigger. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, discovering debts in hidden folders, realizing her entire life was built on lies. And she thought about the woman she was now, sitting on a balcony in an apartment she could afford, enrolled in a program she loved, raising a daughter who was learning that strength wasn't always loud. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "My friend's opening a boutique hotel in the Arts District. Needs someone to design the interiors. Interested? Pays well." Emma stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed, "Send me the details." The hotel project took 3 months. Emma poured herself into it, creating spaces that felt intimate and welcoming, using colors and textures that told stories. When it opened in August, Patricia insisted Emma attend the launch party. Emma brought Maya, who wore a dress she'd picked out herself and stood a little taller when people complimented her mother's work. A woman approached Emma near the end of the evening, holding a business card. "I'm opening a design firm, specializing in residential redesigns. I've seen your portfolio. I'd like to talk about a partnership." Emma took the card, felt its weight. "I'm still finishing my certification." "I know. I'm not in a rush. But when you're ready, call me. I think we could do something special together." The partnership became official in October. Emma Designs, specializing in transforming spaces for women rebuilding their lives. It was a niche market, but it turned out there were a lot of women who needed someone who understood what it meant to create safety from scratch. By December, Emma had moved into a larger apartment with an actual office space. Maya had her own bathroom and walls she'd painted herself in colors Emma would never have chosen, but that somehow worked. The apartment felt alive, full of color and light, and the sound of 2 women who'd learned to laugh again. Emma ran into Karen at the grocery store 2 weeks before Christmas. Karen stopped mid-aisle, clutching her cart like a shield. "Emma." "Karen. I've been meaning to call. To apologize properly. For everything. For taking Lucas's side, for telling him things you'd said in confidence. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Emma looked at the woman who'd been her closest friend. She saw genuine remorse there, genuine regret. Part of her wanted to be angry. Part of her wanted to walk away and let Karen feel the weight of her choices. Instead, she said, "I know. Can we get coffee sometime? Talk." Emma thought about it. Really thought about it. Maybe. Eventually. But not yet. "I'm not there yet." Karen nodded, her eyes wet. "I understand. If you ever are, I'll be here." Emma didn't make promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She just nodded and moved past, continuing her shopping, her life, her forward motion.
Christmas came.
Emma and Maya decorated a small tree with ornaments Maya had made in grade school and new ones they picked out together. They baked cookies and watched old movies and built traditions that had nothing to do with Lucas or the life they'd left behind. On Christmas morning, Maya gave Emma a framed photo. It was from the hotel launch party. Emma was standing in front of one of her design spaces, smiling, looking like someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. "I took it with Patricia's camera," Maya explained. "She sent me the file. I thought you should have it." Emma hung it in her office, where she could see it while she worked. A reminder of who she'd become. Who she'd always been underneath the invisible engine of someone else's success. Lucas sent a card in January. No return address. Just a generic greeting card with a handwritten note inside. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I finally understand what I lost. Not the properties or the business or the money. I lost you. I lost Maya. I lost the only things that actually mattered. I was a fool. I'm sorry." Emma read it twice. Then she put it in a drawer and didn't think about it again. Some apologies came too late. Some bridges burned too hot to rebuild.
And that was okay.
She'd learned that she didn't need Lucas's acknowledgement of what he'd done. Didn't need his apology or his understanding. Didn't need anything from him at all. That was the real freedom. Not revenge. Not watching him suffer. Just the simple, revolutionary act of not needing him anymore. By spring, Emma Designs had 5 employees and a waiting list of clients. Emma had finished her certification and was considering teaching a class at the community college herself. Maya was thriving, making plans for college, talking about architecture or environmental design, or maybe something else entirely because she had options now and time to figure it out. One evening in March, exactly 1 year after the divorce was finalized, Emma stood in her kitchen making dinner. The kitchen she designed herself. The space she'd created from nothing. Maya was at the table doing homework, music playing from her phone, humming along absently. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs. Outside, the spring sun made everything golden. And Emma realized, with a quiet certainty that settled in her bones, that she was happy. Not because Lucas had lost everything. Not because she'd outsmarted him or protected herself or survived the collapse of her marriage. She was happy because she'd built something real. Something solid. Something that belonged only to her and Maya. Something that couldn't be taken by anyone who didn't understand its value. She thought about the woman in the courtroom a year ago, sitting perfectly still while everyone thought she was losing. She thought about all the things she'd lost that turned out not to matter. And all the things she'd found that turned out to be everything. "Mom?" Maya looked up from her homework. "You okay?" Emma smiled.
"Yeah, sweetheart."
"I'm good. You look happy." "I am. Good." Maya went back to her work, satisfied.
Because this was normal now.
This was their life. Built from ruins, stronger than before, proof that sometimes the only way to find yourself is to lose everything else first. People still talked about Lucas Hale sometimes. About his bankruptcy, his fall from grace, his cautionary tale. Emma heard the story secondhand, through networks of people who thought she'd want to know. She didn't. Lucas's story was his own now. She had no part in it anymore. She had her own story. One where she was the protagonist, not the support staff. One where she built with her own hands and created with her own vision and raised her daughter to understand that loving someone never meant erasing yourself. April called occasionally to check in. "How's business?"
"Good.
"Really good." "I'm glad. You deserve it. Thank you. For everything. For seeing what I couldn't see." "You saw it," April corrected. "You just needed someone to tell you it was real." Some nights, late, when Maya was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Emma would sit in her office and remember. The discovery, the betrayal, the fear, the choice she'd made to stay silent and prepare instead of confront and collapse. She'd wonder sometimes what would have happened if she'd done it differently. If she'd confronted Lucas that first night. If she'd fought for the house, the business, all the things he took. But then she'd look around at what she'd built, and she'd know the answer. She'd have gotten things, maybe.
Property.
Assets. But she wouldn't have gotten herself back. She wouldn't have remembered that she was capable of survival, of strategy, of building something from absolutely nothing. Lucas had taught her something valuable in the end, though he'd never understand what it was. He taught her that the person everyone underestimates is often the most dangerous. That the invisible engine, once it stops running, reveals exactly how little substance there was holding everything together. That sometimes the quietest revenge is simply refusing to keep someone else's life from falling apart. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that being underestimated doesn't mean being powerless, do me one last favor. Share this. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the story doesn't end when everything falls apart. That sometimes everything falling apart is exactly what needs to happen for you to realize you never needed it in the first place. Hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories like this coming. Stories about survival, about quiet strength, about people who refuse to let their worst moment define them. Emma Cross walked away from that courtroom with nothing. That's what everyone saw. What they didn't see was that nothing was exactly what she needed. Nothing meant no weight, no lies, no house of cards to maintain. Nothing meant freedom to build something real. So no, Lucas didn't win when he took everything. He lost the moment Emma stopped fighting for what he thought mattered and started protecting what actually did. Her daughter, her sanity, her future, herself. They thought she lost everything when the courtroom doors closed. What they didn't understand was that she'd already won. She'd won the moment she decided that losing things was better than losing herself. That bankruptcy was Lucas's future, not hers. That the woman everyone underestimated had been playing a different game entirely. And in the end, Emma didn't take Lucas's life apart. She simply stopped holding it together. Turned out that was all it took. Because the whole time, the only thing keeping his empire from collapsing was her. And the moment she stepped away, reality did the rest. So, what did Emma really walk away with when those courtroom doors closed? Not revenge. Not vindication. Not even satisfaction, really. What she walked away with was something far more valuable. Something that couldn't be leveraged or mortgaged or taken by anyone who didn't understand its worth. She walked away with her life. Her actual life. Not the performance she'd been giving for 14 years. Not the supporting role in someone else's story. But her own story, messy and uncertain and absolutely, completely hers. And sometimes, that's not just winning. That's everything. 2 years after the divorce, just when Emma thought the past was finally sealed, her phone rang at 11 on a Wednesday night. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Emma Cross. The voice was male, professional, clipped. Yes. This is Detective Morrison with the Financial Crimes Division. I need to ask you some questions about Hale Development Group. Emma's blood went cold. She sat up in bed, her mind racing through every document she'd hidden, every screenshot she'd saved. What kind of questions? We're investigating potential fraud related to property valuations and loan applications. Your name appears on several corporate documents as a managing partner. We need you to come in for questioning. Managing partner. The words hit like a physical blow. She'd signed papers for Lucas, dozens of them over the years. Loan applications. Corporate filings. Documents she'd been told were routine. Had Lucas listed her as more than just a spouse? Had he implicated her in his schemes without her knowledge? I was never a partner. I was his wife. I signed papers he told me to sign. That's what we need to discuss. Can you come in tomorrow at 9? Emma looked at Maya's closed bedroom door. Thought about the business she'd built, the reputation she'd carefully reconstructed. Do I need a lawyer? That's your right. But we're just gathering information at this point. She didn't sleep that night. At 7 in the morning, she called April, who answered on the second ring. They're investigating the fraud, Emma said without preamble. They want to question me. Don't panic. This was always a possibility. Lucas's creditors want someone to blame, and you are connected to the business. But we have documentation proving you weren't involved in decision-making. What if that's not enough? What if they charge me? Then we fight. But, Emma, listen to me. You documented everything. You left a paper trail showing you discovered the fraud and took steps to protect yourself. That's not the behavior of a co-conspirator. That's the behavior of a victim. The questioning lasted 3 hours. Detective Morrison and a federal prosecutor named Sarah Chun went through every document, every signature, every transaction Emma had been remotely connected to. She answered honestly, showing them her own documentation, the evidence she'd gathered when she first discovered Lucas's deception. "Why didn't you report this when you found it?" Chun asked, her eyes sharp. "Because I was terrified," Emma said, and it was true. "I was married to him. I had a daughter to protect. I didn't know if I'd be implicated. I just knew I needed to document everything in case it came back on me." "That's convenient." "No," Emma said quietly. "It's survival. There's a difference." They let her go with a warning not to leave the state. For 3 weeks, Emma lived in a fog of fear. Every phone call made her jump. Every car that slowed near her apartment made her wonder if they were coming back with handcuffs. Her business suffered because she couldn't focus. Maya noticed, asking questions Emma couldn't fully answer. Then April called with news that changed everything. They found Lucas's emails. From before the divorce. He wrote to his accountant admitting he'd hidden the debts from you. There's a message where he literally says, "Emma doesn't know about the Riverside loans.
Keep it that way."
You're clear. They're not pursuing charges. Emma sat down on her office floor and cried. Not from relief, though that was part of it. She cried because even after everything, even after the divorce and the bankruptcy and the year of rebuilding, Lucas had almost destroyed her again. One last trap she hadn't seen coming. One last way he could have dragged her down with him. But the trap had a flaw. Lucas's arrogance. His need to document everything, to leave a paper trail of his own cleverness. And that arrogance had saved her. "Is it really over?" Emma asked. "It's over," April confirmed. "Lucas is facing charges. Federal fraud, multiple counts. You're listed as a victim in the case file. It's officially over." 3 years later, Emma Designs had offices in 2 cities. Maya was in college studying architecture, calling home twice a week to tell her mother about her projects, her friends, her life. And Emma was sitting in a client meeting, presenting a redesign concept for a woman's home after her divorce, when she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd thought about Lucas. Not in anger, not in hurt, not even in that distant, clinical way she'd thought about him in the months after everything ended. She simply didn't think about him at all. He'd become irrelevant to her story. A chapter that had closed completely, leaving no loose threads. That night, she called Maya.
"Hey, Mom.
"Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect. I just wanted to hear your voice." "You sound happy." "I am. I really am." "Good. You deserve to be." They talked about nothing for 20 minutes, the kind of easy conversation that meant everything was exactly as it should be. When Emma hung up, she sat in her office, surrounded by design plans and fabric samples and the evidence of a life well built, and smiled. They'd thought she lost everything. Let them think it. She knew the truth. And the truth was this: you can't lose what actually matters if you never let go of it in the first place. Lucas had taken things. Buildings. Accounts. Status. But Emma? Emma had walked away with everything that mattered. Her dignity. Her daughter's trust. Her sense of self. And the knowledge that she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. So to everyone watching who's ever been underestimated, ever been told they didn't contribute, ever been made to feel small by someone who needed them to stay that way, remember this: the person everyone overlooks is often the person who sees everything. And the moment you stop holding someone else's life together is the moment you discover how strong you really are. Because in the end, Emma didn't need revenge. She just needed to stop saving someone who'd never appreciated the rescue. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do. Not destroy. Just withdraw. Let gravity and truth do their work. And build something beautiful from the space you've reclaimed. They thought she lost everything when those courtroom doors closed. But what she really did She walked into the rest of her life.
Free. Clear.
And finally, completely herself.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We have lots more content coming soon.